Wonderful. Hello, hello. Um, hey everybody. Welcome to Virtual Coffee, Lunch and Learn Edition. For those of you who are watching this online and may not know what this is all about, Virtual Coffee's mission is to be a welcoming tech community that allows room for growth and mentorship at all levels and to create meaningful opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. If you want to find out more, you can always check out our site, virtualcoffee.io. We're really happy to have you here with us today. And I especially want to thank our presenter for being here. Today we have the wonderful Jessica Wilkins. Jessica Wilkins is a self-taught developer and technical writer from Los Angeles, California. In her previous career, she was a professional oboist, educator, and owner of JDW Sheet music. Jessica's interest in programming came during the pandemic when she wanted to build the Black Excellence Music Project, which celebrates Black artists from the jazz and classical fields. She now works full-time with the Free Code Camp news publication. And I feel like, what's also sort of equally as important for us, Jessica is a wonderful member of this community. She's always been one of the more positive, just wonderful people here, always contributing to the space, always happy to share insights. I have read many Jessica Wilkins articles over the last few years, and they've always been sort of like a joy and education for me. And as we start off Preptember, which is our month of gearing up for the month of October, where we celebrate Hacktoberfest in this community, Jessica has graciously taken this opportunity to do a little presentation for us for sort of like what open source is all about. So with that, I am going to hand it off to her. And yeah, Jessica, you've got the floor.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, Kirk, and thanks for everyone for coming out this morning or afternoon there. Yeah, so really excited to present and talk about just my experience as a maintainer during Hacktoberfest last year. I maintained a few repositories, and I'm going to be sharing some tips there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So we'll just have a short little presentation. And then we'll have questions and answers afterwards. So feel free to drop your questions in chat, and then we will have a little Q&A there. All right, cool. So let me see if I can move this bar off to the side. Yeah, let's hide that. Okay, cool. Cool. And cool. All right, and we'll start the slideshow. Awesome. We are ready to rock and roll. So yeah, so this presentation is all about how to best prepare for Hacktoberfest. There are a lot of little things that you need to do. And so it's really best to use this month of September to get ready if you're interested in being a maintainer for a repository that you own, or maybe your organization is interested in joining Hacktoberfest and you need to know, like, how do I actually get ready? So that's what this whole presentation is about there. So yeah, so last year was actually my very first time as a maintainer during Hacktoberfest, and I maintained actually a few repositories for my last company, and then also for freeCodeCamp. And so for the freeCodeCamp repository, I was the maintainer for the developer quiz site, which has over 1,200 plus questions on programming. And that was the first year that we entered that repository into Hacktoberfest, and we received a ton of PRs. We received over 350 that were reviewed and approved and merged in. So I'm going to talk about all of that experience, about what worked well, and then things that we could change for this year's Hacktoberfest. Yeah. So go back. There we go. Tip 1. So getting organized. So showing up to this presentation is a good first step on thinking about what needs to happen. And so the main piece of advice I would give is just write down all the different things that we're going to talk about, all the different things you need to do to get your repository ready. Don't try to keep all of this in your head and think, oh, I'll just remember it. Like, write it down somewhere. And so a few things that you could do: you can create a project board or maybe you already have a GitHub project board associated with your repository, and add some tickets there on items that you need to add to get ready for Hacktoberfest. Or maybe you want a separate Trello board, or maybe a Notion template, or a Google Doc, or pen and paper. It doesn't really matter. Just write something down, right? Have a running list and check it off throughout the month. And we'll talk about kind of pacing yourself throughout the month on how to get everything ready. But don't try to keep everything in your head because you're going to forget things, and then you're going to be in the middle of Hacktoberfest and say, "Oh yeah, I forgot to add this or that." And so we just want to make sure we take care of all of that during the month of September. So the next tip is to add a code of conduct. And so this is 100% necessary. It doesn't matter if you think like, oh, well, my repository is really small and I don't know if how many people are going to use it. You need to have a code of conduct. And basically what this is it basically outlines how people are expected to conduct themselves in public in your repository. And we want to be very clear on what we consider harassment, what we consider trolling. And so we don't want to be ambiguous. So this was lifted from freeCodeCamp's actual code of conduct. And what you're going to do is in the root directory of your project, you're going to add a code of conduct.md, a markdown file that is basically a page or two explicitly saying, hey, this is what we will not tolerate. And so if you want to have ideas on how to put together code of conducts, there's a lot of incredible resources out there. freeCodeCamp has a few resources. I know open source has a few resources as well. And so you can kind of look at how other repositories will handle this, but it's extremely important that you have a code of conduct. That way, if there are any incidents, you can direct people to the code of conduct and handle it that way. But you do have to have it written down, very explicit on what you will and will not tolerate as people are contributing to your project there. So the next thing that we have is your README. So some of you might be creating a brand new project for Hacktoberfest and choosing to maintain it. And then others might have a project that they want to dust off, or maybe a project that you started a few months ago and you want to enter into Hacktoberfest. So whatever your situation is, you need to make sure your README is up to date. That way contributors can onboard to your project and contribute in a successful manner. So here are a few things that need to be included. Number one, it needs to be an introduction to what the project actually is. I've seen a lot of Hacktoberfest repositories that still use like the default README that comes when you set up a project with like Vite or something like that, and or like a Next.js project or something, and it just comes with that default README. That's not really helpful to like what your project is actually about. And so make sure that you update your README, and it includes a few sentences on like, what is this project? Is it a CLI tool? Is it some sort of cool game? What are we here to expect from your project? Another thing that needs to include is, how can I actually run this locally? I can't tell you how many repositories I've seen that actually just don't have these instructions. And it's like, I need to know how to actually set this thing up instead of just guessing and being like, I guess I do this. And so make sure you're very clear on the steps to actually clone the project and be able to set it up locally so contributors can get onboarded and get started with their contributions. Another thing is the contributing file, which we'll get to a little bit later, but this is a separate markdown file on how to best contribute and which issues are open for contribution. And then a code of conduct, which we just talked about. So a link to your code of conduct there would be really helpful. And then also, if you have a project that's linked to your personal Discord or Slack groups or something like that, it'd be helpful to have those links. So if your contributors want to participate in conversations about this project and you already have other outside groups linked to this project, that would be really helpful to have those links there. Cool. So the tip number 4 is to add a license markdown file. So a license basically just says like the permissions and modifications that you're allowed to make for that particular file. So one of the most popular ones is the MIT license. Another one is the BSD 3 license. And so that's the one that freeCodeCamp uses. So there is a website called license.md that I would suggest checking out if you want to learn more about like the intricacies of the different open source licenses. But you definitely need to have this and make sure that people know like what they can actually do and the permissions that they have with your repository. So a lot of you will probably end up using the MIT license there, but you do need to have a physical file. And there's a lot of resources there that you can copy the legal language that you see here and then just interchange it with the date and your particular organization there. So tip number 5. So make sure you have a descriptive about section with relevant tags. So I've seen a lot of open source projects that have decided to enter into Hacktoberfest that had this section blank. And here's the thing, like this is probably one of the first things that you want to do because during the month of September, while you're maintaining, getting your repository ready as a maintainer, there are tens of thousands of people looking for repositories, especially during the first last 2 weeks of September. And so they're going to be looking for projects by the tag name and then also a quick look at your about section. So if your about section is blank, then it's going to be really hard for people to discover you during that critical time where people are actively looking for projects. And so just for the about section, just write like 1 or 2 sentences. So this was lifted from the developer quiz site and it's very short and sweet to the point. And then we also have a link to the site. So if your project is deployed somewhere, definitely add that link for easy access so people can kind of play around with the app and get a sense of what they might be contributing to. And then the tags there. And so I would make sure to add the relevant tags so people know it's a React project or it has TypeScript or CSS because people are actively looking for that. They're looking to contribute to Python projects or C# projects or C++. And so make sure you add all of the relevant tags associated with your project. All right. And so the next tip is to add a contributing file. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but you in the root directory of your repository, you'll need to add a contributing.markdown file. And you want to make sure that it includes a few different things. Number one, step-by-step instructions on how to actually set this project up locally. And so you can lift those from the README. But you want to make sure you're very, very clear. You're not skipping steps, especially if you have a lot of different services connected and your repository is a little bit more complicated. You need to make sure to outline all of that because I've been with organizations where there were certain things missing from the contributing file, and then our contributors couldn't, contribute there. They had to write issues and say, hey, how do I set this up with AWS and whatnot? And so we were lacking in that contributing file. So make sure you write everything out. You don't skip steps. You don't miss anything out as clear as day. That way people know how to actually contribute. And then it would be helpful to run this file by your community there. So we're in the virtual coffee community. And if you want to share your repository within the open source channels and whatnot and say, hey, can someone take a look at this? Does this make sense? That would also be helpful too. So other things that you can include in that file would be how to actually make a pull request. If you have preferred branching conventions that you want people to follow, definitely add this in here. But outlining the process that you want people to follow is really important, especially if your repository is geared more towards beginners. You want to make sure that they have a nice step-by-step outlining all the different steps that they run within the CLI. And they understand what to expect. And then I also have a link here. Our project is linked to the freeCodeCamp forum, but maybe you have a project linked to GitHub discussions or another outlet where people can ask questions. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later there. All right, cool. So tip number 7, issue and PR labels, pull request labels. So by default, whenever you create a brand new GitHub repository, they will come with a few default labels like help wanted or good first issue, but there's definitely a few other labels that you might consider, and you want to make sure you set that up now as opposed to just in the middle of Hacktoberfest. So here are just a few labels from a few of the projects that I've maintained. So available for pickup. I think this is a really helpful label. I've seen a lot of open source projects use this to make it clear that, hey, contributors, this is open. Of course, you could use like the good first issue label and help wanted, but I think also the available for pickup, making it clear to contributors, yes, this is available. Another good one, like a bug label and do not merge, mainly for like PRs and stuff like that. If you need to hold back merging a PR, documentation, features. Another one is issue assigned. And so this is more so like if you are experiencing a lot of contributors coming, and you want to kind of keep track of which issues are still open and which ones are being worked on. So I would highly suggest maybe just adding an issue assigned or issue already taken or taken label or something like that, just to at a quick glance let people know like, hey, this is not open for contribution. And so kind of deciding that ahead of time, how you want to manage that would be best. Another label would be the spam label. So unfortunately, sometimes you will get spam PRs. Hopefully you won't get too many, or hopefully maybe you won't get any, but if you do, you want to be ready for that. And the easiest way to deal with that is to just close it. You could have some sort of automated message or GitHub action that detects spam. Some repositories do that, but you can also just reply back and saying, hey, we're choosing not to move forward with your PR, slap the spam label on it, close it, move on. So you definitely want to have that spam label. And then particularly for Hacktoberfest, they do have it in their rules where if contributors have two spam PRs, then they're no longer able to participate. So it's really important that if you do get a spam PR or issue, then you just close it immediately, throw the spam label on it, and then keep on moving. And yeah, so those are just a few of the issue and PR labels to kind of consider adding. And the way you add that is if you go to your issues tab, and then you'll see the labels. You can click on the labels there, and then you can add your own custom labels. So in addition to those labels, there's two that you will absolutely need to have. One of them is the actual Hacktoberfest label. So the way that you opt into Hacktoberfest is that you are going to need to add the Hacktoberfest label to your About section in your repository. So we saw a few slides back that we had a few labels like React and TypeScript. You'll also need to label with Hacktoberfest so people know that you're actually participating. And then the other label would be the Hacktoberfest accepted, and this goes on your PRs. And so there will be times where you're going through your PR reviews, but you're not able to merge it before October 31st. And maybe you're waiting for other PRs to be merged before you can merge that one, but you still want to make sure that the contributor gets the credit because they did technically have it approved and they did work on it during the month of October. So you can slap this Hacktoberfest accepted label, and then it's totally fine if it gets merged after October 31st. But as long as that label goes on, and then it's merged later on, then they'll still get credit. And I had a few PRs that were merged, the first week of November, but I was still able to get credit for Hacktoberfest because it had that label. So those two labels are really important that you want to add there. All right, cool. Tip number 8. So needing to create issue templates. So issue templates are basically a way for you to help guide your contributors on creating detailed issues. And you can create this within your repository and break it up into different categories. So here we've lifted this from the freeCodeCamp repositories. So we have like bug reports, documentation, issues, feature requests, or just a general one. And so the way that you create this here, this is actually what it would look like. So this is an example from the freeCodeCamp main repository. And this is our bug report. And so you can actually create YAML files, and there's a whole extensive list on in steps on how to do that within the GitHub documentation. So I would highly suggest looking through that on how to create issue templates, because I think that documentation is really good. And there's also a whole bunch of other articles and videos too that walk you through that. But this is an example here. And then you see there, we have the little red asterisk that says describe the issue, or which page does this issue fall on, or in this case, since this is for freeCodeCamp, we have a section where people can list out the code that's not passing some of the tests for the curriculum. So you can be as restrictive or as open you want with these issues there, but making sure to just guide your users so they know which information you need from them. And it really does help to cut down on the back and forth, because sometimes if you just get a general issue, then you're going to go back to them and say, hey, what are the steps to recreate that issue, or what page is this found on? So So I do find that this helps cut down on some of that. Sometimes people are going to ignore the issue templates and just not write anything in that, but most people do actually follow these issue templates, and so that's something to consider. So where do these issue templates live? So within the root directory, you're going to create a new directory called .github. And then inside there, you can create a whole folder called issue template. So this is lifted from the freeCodeCamp repository, where we have a whole bunch of different YAML files. And again, there's an extensive documentation and tutorial on GitHub's documentation page on how to create these YAML files. And so this is just an example of one of those YAML files in the structure. So you can, for these issue templates, assign particular labels to them, and then you can also say which fields you were looking for and if they're required fields. So yeah, this is just kind of an example of how to create these different issue templates. So that's something I would definitely consider looking into. And I don't think you need to create a whole bunch of them, but just some general categories like bug reports, new features, and stuff like that. Documentation updates would be another one there. All right, cool. So along the same lines of issue templates, we have pull request or PR templates. And basically, this is another file that you can create, another YAML file you can create to direct users to provide all the relevant necessary information about what this PR is about. Now, this one's really helpful because a lot of people, especially if they're newer to open source, aren't entirely sure what they should include in their PR. And so just having some checklists here that you can see that people need to follow, and then a little section that you can add on like what is this PR about is really helpful. And then also that down below where it says the closes keyword. So if an issue is supposed to close an issue, or PR is supposed to close an issue, then they can use the closes keyword or resolved keyword. And sometimes it helps to add like a link to that GitHub documentation on the different keywords that are used to close issues when a PR is merged. But yeah, these PR templates are really helpful, especially if someone doesn't fill it out and we are missing information as a maintainer. We can easily point to the PR template and say, hey, please make sure to go through this checklist. We're missing some information, and then they'll go back and make those changes. So considering these PR templates, and there's a lot of extensive ones. I know open source has some incredible ones, so if you're interested in looking in that. But there's a lot of variety of PR templates, some very bare and then some very extensive. So using this time in Preptember to kind of research the different PR templates that you can use, and then you can kind of copy and paste some of them and then alter them and modify them to suit your needs there. All right, cool. Tip number 10. So we talked a lot about basic setup and certain files, but now we're going to get to the heart of it, which are issues. So here's the thing, like you need actual issues that people can contribute to. And so I would definitely spend some time thinking about what you are looking for in terms of contributions. And so creating well-defined issues is really going to be the heart of what you're going to be doing during Preptember, making sure that people know what to contribute to. And so this is an actual issue that our good friend Becca worked on a few weeks ago and has been successfully merged and is live on the developer quiz site. But you want to make sure that if it's a bug report, list out the different steps on how to reproduce that bug, which page it's found on, what's happening within the network errors and stuff like that. Any relevant information that will allow the contributor to be successful in debugging that error and providing a solution. Now, you don't have to go through and be like, all right, here's the exact fix, and then on line 24 of this file, like add this code. You don't need to be that explicit, but you do need to provide as much information as possible so they can be successful in fixing that. And then when it comes to features, particularly if there are style changes, so this particular feature that we're looking at did have a few style changes, and so I was very explicit on like, here's what the first slide should look like, here's the second slide. So I walked Becca through the different slides and the user behavior I was looking for, and that gave her all the information that she needed to be successful and knock it out of the park like she did with this particular issue. And so if you are looking for style changes, like don't leave it be ambiguous, because one of the first Hacktoberfest I participated in wanted all these style changes, but then they didn't say what styles they wanted. So it was a lot of back and forth of like, okay, do you want this, or what colors do you want? And so you can cut down on all of that back and forth and be very explicit and saying, this is exactly what I want. So you can have screenshots like I did here and mock-ups, or you can have a Figma file, whatever you need to be doing. Just make sure it's super, super clear to your contributors what you're looking for. You don't kind of want to leave that up to chance there. All right, cool. And so this is actually another issue that I created. So if this is for the developer quiz site, the majority of the PRs that we got were for quiz questions. And so I was very explicit on what I was looking for and the format for the quiz questions. And then making sure to check if their question was already in the quiz. And so you want to be as explicit as possible, also linking to where the file that they can change there. So providing as much information as possible so your contributors can be successful. One last thing is making sure when you're creating these issues, tag it with the appropriate labels. So I slapped on the Hacktoberfest label, the Good First Issue label, the Help Wanted label. And I also made it very clear, like certain issues are just going to remain open and multiple contributors can do it. And this is not going to be closed. And then there's other issues where it's like you need to ask to be assigned to it. So be extremely clear in your language on what this issue is about. And so if you are looking for people, multiple contributors for an issue, then make it clear that that's the case. Otherwise, if it's just one person, you want them to be assigned to it and asked to be assigned to it. Every single repository does it differently. There's some repositories that will say, oh, if it has the help wanted label, you don't need to ask to be assigned. I personally like the assignment if you're only looking for one person to look on an issue, because it just makes it easier, because then you run into that situation where you have like multiple PRs open for the same thing, particularly if it's like an easier issue and then you have to turn one down. And so really thinking about your process should be part of Preptember on how you want to handle those certain things and kind of iron that out before you get into Hacktoberfest. All right, cool. So tip number 11 is using saved replies. So this was something I started doing last year where I have a few different saved replies. And basically what this is, these are messages that you can create within your actual user settings. So not the repo settings, but your GitHub user settings. And you can create a whole series of saved replies because there's certain things that you're going to end up saying over and over and over again. So you can actually save this and use it for a variety of projects. So if you go to your GitHub user settings and you scroll down to the saved replies, this is what it will look like. And so you can see I have a few here. So a few that you can count on are approving a contributor. So I kind of broke it down between approving a returning contributor, and I have a little short message on congrats on another contribution. And then I also have congratulating a first-time contributor. And then also if you're not accepting a PR, you can just have some sort of standard message to let them know. Or if it's sometimes people open PRs for issues that aren't available, then you can have a message for that. And then I also had a message for reviewing the requested changes. And so basically it was just thanking them for the contribution and then saying, hey, if you could take a look at these review comments, that would be great. So those are just a few different replies that you can kind of think of. And again, this will be saved within your GitHub user settings. And then to actually use a reply, this could be used for issues or PRs. So if you're about to leave a comment, you can click on the little left arrow there. And it will open up all the different saved replies that you have in your GitHub settings, and you just click on one and it will autofill it with that text. And so this saves you a lot of time. Instead of just typing out the same thing over and over, you just click on the saved reply and then keep it moving. And so I just found that this was super helpful because I ended up merging a lot of PRs and ended up saying a lot of the same thing, like congratulating them or asking for changes. And so this was super, super helpful there. All right, tip number 12 is setting up GitHub discussions. So there is a feature on GitHub where you can have contributors participate in different discussions. I know Virtual Coffee uses this feature, particularly for whatever discussions that we're dealing with, especially for like the book clubs and stuff like that. So I'd highly suggest opening this up for your project. And we actually got a lot of traction, and this allows people to just ask general questions or request features and kind of talk through those features if it's not fully fleshed out. And then also if they just want to participate in the different discussions. So this is from our developer quiz site on freeCodeCamp, and so we had a few people ask questions or just talk about different features. And I found that this is really helpful because people got involved within the conversation. And then GitHub does have a way where you kind of turn that into, or at least copy and paste some of that into an actual issue to make it really easy once you've kind of fleshed out a feature. And we had that a few times where people were interested in the feature, but it wasn't entirely fleshed out. And so we had a conversation about it. And then we were able to, once it was fleshed out, easily convert it to an issue. And then a contributor was able to work on it from there. So I'd highly suggest opening this up. Now, you will have to go into your user settings and make sure that the GitHub discussions is enabled. I think it's under your general user settings, and you have to scroll down and it's like a little checkbox that says GitHub discussions. So make sure that that's turned on for your repository so you can actually see the GitHub discussions and enable that. And then once that's enabled, you can do what I did where you say, hey, welcome to our site and our discussions, and have like a little message. And as you can see, a few people had responded. And that's another way where people can actually discover your project. We have a few people find us through our GitHub discussions and then end up contributing for there. So I would highly suggest setting this up, especially if you don't have another outlet for your contributors to communicate with you outside of issues. So you might have some sort of Slack group, or you might have some sort of Discord or forum, but I do think GitHub discussions is really helpful, and then setting that up during the month of September is a good idea there. Tip number 13. So this one's really, I guess, kind of quasi-optional. I guess it really depends on your repository. But GitHub Actions is a feature where you can do a lot of automated workflows, particularly for tests and linting and stuff like that. You can also have automated messages show up. So if a user opens a PR or they make changes in the wrong file, like freeCodeCamp has a few automated GitHub Actions. If they modify certain translated files, because that's a separate workflow process, there's an automated message that notifies them like, hey, you accidentally modified this file, please revert those changes. So there's so many different GitHub Actions that you can do, and there's a whole marketplace. If you just Google like GitHub Actions Marketplace, there's a lot of actions that people have already created that are free that you could go and you can search for like actions for formatting and linters and end-to-end tests and stuff like that. So these are just a few actions that we've created for the main freeCodeCamp repository, which has the core curriculum. So a lot of them are just end-to-end testing and stuff like that, and PR validations and whatnot. Another thing too is there's a feature on GitHub about protected branches. And so depending on your repository, if you need or want to have required approval before a merge there, or at least 2 approvals in our case for freeCodeCamp, to add like an extra security or extra eyes on something, that could be something helpful, and you can set that up within your GitHub's repository settings. So it just really depends on the needs of your repository. Some people will not use this protected branch feature, which is totally fine, but others will feel a little bit safer, particularly if it's a larger repository or something that they're maintaining for their company and it's being open sourced. They'll still want at least 1 approval before it can be merged, or in our case, 2 approvals. So that's something to kind of think about as well there. All right, cool. So our final tip before we go into the Q&A is to always make sure that you're leading with patience, empathy, and kindness. So preparing for September, there's a lot of things that we covered. There's a lot of different things that we talked about. And then actually getting into Hacktoberfest, you're going to meet a whole bunch of different people. I was never expecting to merge over 350 PRs last year. but just maintaining that patience and empathy, because a lot of people are brand new to open source, and they really are trying their best. And so this was a commenter that really wanted to contribute. He was having some issues setting things up, and he was brand new to programming and open source, but everybody in the community was really helpful and patient with him. And then he was able to contribute, and we were really happy for him, because he was really interested in getting with that. And that lasting effect really does stay with somebody, because if they have a good experience, they're going to want to replicate that and participate further in open source, which is the whole point of Hacktoberfest. And so I know that things can be a little bit stressful, especially if you're maintaining a whole bunch of different reviews. And one other comment on that, this is not necessarily so much for Preptember, but just actual Hacktoberfest. If you're flooded with a whole bunch of reviews, like I know the first day we had like 30 PRs, and so if you're flooded with a whole bunch of PRs, don't feel the need to like answer everybody right away. Like, I get it, you guys have full-time jobs and you have lives and stuff like that. It's totally fine if you get back to it when you're able to get back to it. So don't feel pressured where you're like, oh my gosh, so I have all these PRs, I've got to answer it like within 15 minutes of it being open. No, you don't. Like, people will wait. They'll be fine. And so sometimes you'll get people that are like, oh my gosh, have you seen my PR? And you can just be like, yeah, I did see it, but we're all cool. I'll get to it when I get to it. So don't put extra pressure on yourself. Making sure that you're healthy throughout this whole process and not stressing yourself out is really key, especially if your repository ends up taking off like ours did and had like tons of PRs. You don't need to reply right away. It's just whenever you have some time. So just making sure to carve out some time during the month of October and when you're going to do these reviews, I found to be really helpful there. So whether it's in the mornings there or afternoons or evenings, just carve out some time, and also communicate with, if you're maintaining a repository for a company, make sure to really be clear on how much they're expecting of you to maintain different PRs, because you want to make sure those expectations are laid out front. Because if they're expecting you to just constantly be monitoring this thing, especially if you're not getting paid extra to do this or whatever, like, you want to be super, super clear if you're maintaining a repository with your company, what the expectations are, especially during this Preptember phase, how many hours you're supposed to be spending on preparing all these materials, who else is working on it with you. So at my last company, we had a small little committee that was maintaining a few repositories, and we had like a list of things that we were going through, but it was very clear, like, only spend X amount of hours of your work week doing this. And so you want to be really clear with your company, because you don't want to be in a situation where they're expecting you to do all this extra stuff and you just didn't know about that. So communication is key there. And I believe so that is our last. I'm going to stop screen sharing, but yeah, that's going to be our very last slide there. So now we can open up to questions. So if anybody has any questions about, I know I threw a whole bunch of stuff your way, but if anybody has questions, we can open up the floor. Yeah.
I was about to say, where is my unmute? So before we jump into questions, I just want to say thank you. That was very, very comprehensive. There was a couple things in there. I consider myself, I've been in this open source game for a bit, and then you said some stuff, I was like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. That's actually pretty, the saved replies feels incredibly useful to my life.
It is a lifesaver, yes.
Yeah. I also really appreciate it. I feel like the order you went through them feels like a good sort of like priority list. Like number one, gotta have like your code of conduct, your contributing, your readmes, and then we can get into PR templates. So I like sort of like start and go through, and as much as you can get through feels like a good idea, but no pressure. I have some questions, but I'll also open up the floor to folks. You can either use the raise hands feature if you want to ask it aloud directly, or if you don't want to, you can type it in the chat and then I will ask for you. But yeah, floor is open, folks. David.
Hi. Yes. So, what would happen if you have to like reject a pull request? Is there a way to like message the person and tell them why the request was rejected, and so the person doesn't think he's discriminating against them or something, and that there's a legit reason on why his request was rejected?
Yeah, that's a great question on like how do you handle if you do have to close a PR and it's not going to be accepted. And so there's a few issues for that. Number one, if for some reason they are combative, then I immediately link to the code of conduct saying, hey, this is how we're going to conduct ourselves here. If they're going to continue to be combative, then just close the PR, don't argue with them, and then just move on. And usually people like that, as long as you don't feed into it, then they just move on to other things. If you do have to close the PR for other reasons, the only other main reason I had to close the PR for that particular developer quiz repo is if they stole quiz questions from another project, which we will not allow on freeCodeCamp for obvious reasons. We did have a one of those saved replies where it says, hey, these quiz questions came from here, and we will not allow that because that is plagiarism. So we are going to close your PR, but if you want to come up with your own quiz questions, then feel free to open up a new PR. And so just making it very clear on why you need to close it. Very rarely will I close a PR if like they made mistakes or if they have merge conflicts or something like that. Then I'll just let them know. Or if they're failing some of our automated tests, we have a few automated tests for like linting and stuff like that. So if they're failing like tests, then we can of course work with them. But the only time I would close it is if they've violated some sort of like plagiarism or something like that. And the other time would be if it's like clearly a spam post. And so sometimes people will just post just random things and they'll make random changes to our README that don't really make much sense at all. And then and it's clearly not asked for, and so we'll just close that and we'll have that automated message of like, we reviewed it, we decided not to move forward at this time. And so just having those, you can add that to your saved reply just to save it all the time. And if you're working with other maintainers, particularly for a work project, if you want to run that, those replies by your other, like your manager or something like that, just to make sure everything's cool, that's always helpful too. But yeah, those are the very few times that I would close a PR, is if it's clearly spam or if it's combative or something like that. But most of the times we'll keep it open. Oh, the other I guess issue is like if it's a duplicate PR. We had somebody that was already assigned to a PR, but then someone else wanted to do it, so we had to close that and say, hey, this is already being worked on over here, it's already being assigned. And so we're going to go ahead and close this, but feel free, and then always just end it with like, but feel free to contribute in this way. And so you want to keep the conversation kind of moving and encourage them to contribute, because most people do want to contribute and will behave, and you'll have a couple of bad apples, but you just squash it immediately, throw the code of conduct at them in a nice way, and usually they'll just go on to whatever else they're doing. But yeah, that's a great question there.
Thanks, Jessica. I guess just maybe the one other addition I thought of that, in a long-standing project, you can hit scenarios. The last one you gave of like a duplicate PR is the most common one for me, and I've seen that during Hacktoberfest a lot. I like to use the issue assigned label, but some people just sort of miss that, and they will just like proactively submit a PR like, hey, someone else has already got this, feel free to try another one. So that's pretty common. With long-standing projects, sometimes you do hit an idea where a PR is open and then the project has decided to go in some direction where that PR or that issue might not be relevant anymore. So there's like a process of like, close the issue, close the PR, put notes on it for anyone who sees it, like, hey, we're not going in this direction anymore. And yeah, like you said, polite message to the person, for these reasons, we can't go through this. It's nothing personal to you. Feel free to try something else. And that's usually cool. I'm going to read a message in the chat here from Taryn, who says, first time maintainer, any advice you can give regarding scope if you're creating a project specifically for Hacktoberfest?
Yeah, that's a great question there. And so if this is your very first Hacktoberfest, I would create a project that's a little bit more on the smaller side. So I know some people will create projects where they can contribute like leak code questions or quiz questions or stuff like that. Or it's like I think Nick last year like was creating a game. I think it was like Connect 4 or something like that was the repository. But don't try to create some like crazy ambitious like full stack app this month and then like being like, all right, here's all these issues, because that's a recipe for like burning yourself out. So create something maybe a little bit on the smaller side if you're brand new to this, and then create a few issues that you would like to see with this repository, and then just kind of see how it goes. But don't feel the need to be like, all right, we're going to create this crazy new, ambitious project with all these like connected services, and then we're going to launch it. I mean, I guess that would be a good learning experience, but then you might end up just burning yourself out trying to manage all those different things and preparing for it. So create something preferably on the smaller side, and then kind of understanding like who is your audience, because not all repositories are going to be beginner friendly in the sense like of newer developers. There's some repositories where you will have to have a few years of experience to kind of ramp up with the project. And if you are interested in creating something like that, I mean, that's totally fine. But I would lean something more to kind of the smaller side, just is in terms of management, and then also just thinking realistically, like how many hours a week do you have time for this? And so, because you might get a whole rush of visitors, like I did. Like I didn't expect that many. I thought I was like, hey, we're just gonna get like maybe like 15 or 20 PRs, because most of the time, and Becca can speak to this, like the developer quest site is relatively quiet most of the year, but then October we got like this huge rush. And I was just like, wow, I was not expecting that. And so just kind of being prepared, because you might get a huge rush of new contributors. And so you want a project that you can easily manage throughout that month with whatever time that you have there.
Totally. And I think like also to what you were saying before about like having a really clear contributors file. We always tell people like the more info and heads up and lead time you give other people, the better for open source. So like if you know your bandwidth for the month is like, I'm checking like the status of these things like once a week, like throw that in the contributors, like, hey, you're free to like take these requests and these issues, but I'm only like, these are getting reviewed like on Fridays, or these are getting reviewed on the weekends, or like give me 3 days for me to do a full review. And that sort of avoids like, there's a small minority of people who will sort of be rude, but for the most part, it's just like people have contributed and it's the first time like, oh, I don't know if this is a good idea. I don't know if this is good. If they sort of know, like, don't worry, it's like it's okay. And I would say if you want to do a big project, that can be fine. But like Jessica was saying, like really think about what is my scope of this project for this month. So maybe it is a long-term ongoing project, but like, but what can I get done this month? And maybe sort of accept the fact that if you are making a project where you want it to be like beginner friendly and accessible, and like issues for people new to open source, like those are going to take time and those processes are going to be slower, right? So like, yeah, if you're trying to do a product launch in a month, like that might be difficult. But if you say like, oh, I want to make all these issues on getting this project set up this month, maybe I work on thinking about like core features and stuff like that. I have people who come in and like help with like testing and like setting up different things and scaffolding. That can totally work too. So, and as always, we say, like, if you're worried or you're unsure, am I doing this the right way? That's what the community's for. You can ask someone here, like, do you think this is a good plan? What do you think about this setup? And we can probably help out with that. Becca says you might want a soft launch in September. Right. That is also get the basics up just enough that you can start accepting some contributions, see how that process goes, and then afterwards you can assess, like, do I want to keep this open for everyone? What types of issues do I want to like give to other people versus keep for myself? A label that I've always found useful and we use sometimes with Virtual Coffee is assign to maintainer as a label for certain issues. Stuff like, I want to put this issue up, but this is actually not for everyone. This is just for us because it's weird or gnarly or technical, and so really make the process work for you, for sure.
Yeah, we ran into that issue with my last company where we had a repository that a lot of the issues were really for the core team, and we really should have had a label that said like core team only. Looking back on it, because if I was an outside contributor, I'd be like, oh, can I work on this? And then it's like clearly not. So we really should have had that label. So if you are working on a project for your company and they're deciding to open source it, make sure to have those labels in place and talk with your manager and your team and be like, hey, we really should do this. One thing that we added, at my last company is we created a whole bunch of GitHub actions to thank the contributor once the PR was approved and merged. And so that's something else if you enjoy writing GitHub actions and stuff like that, or there's a few on the marketplace that you could actually just use and just like copy to your PR. So that's something to kind of look into. And then if you do have like a Slack group or something or Discord, we end up connecting it to our Slack, and it's sent to the marketing channel so they can see how many people were contributing to our open source projects. And so that's another avenue that you can kind of go down as well.
Yeah, no, it's all, the nice part about this space is that there's a lot of people in the space and a lot of people are working on stuff. And, you know, I think like this presentation has been a great job of like all the good suggestions for things to do. But another thing to remember is like, almost none of this you have to do from scratch. You know, there's sample readme, sample contributors, sample code of conducts, sample issues, like almost everything. Like it's really, you know, like you can search, find a template that works for you. Even now, like the GitHub actions, you know, so very little you have to do bespoke unless you want to, right? I think GitHub also just like even shows you a nice little simple like quick checklist of like key files that it wants you to have, and it'll tick every time you like get one of those in, which is great for me. Like I live for the tick. That's how I got through grade school. So you know, there's a lot of resources to make it easy to get your repo like accessible for other people to contribute. So you know, just like don't be I understand feeling overwhelmed with this process and you're worried like, oh, if I don't do this all right, like this isn't perfect. You don't have to be perfect. Something's better than nothing. And as long as you are getting started and you are open and you are like finding other people who are open to helping, you know, that's the start. And we just add these little bits to make it like easier for everyone, right? That's the goal here, making it easier for you as the person running the project to run your project and focus on the things that matter to you, which is like helping and supporting others as they help and support you, and make it easy for them to find your project and like have all the tools they need to like work together with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the main thing is for Preptember, like don't feel like you have to do all of this this week. I threw a lot of information at you, so just like really space this out. And so you could say, okay, today I saw this presentation, and then maybe in a few days I'll do this, or I'll add the code of conduct, and so. But don't feel like I got to do everything this week or this weekend. Like, oh, go outside and have fun this weekend, and just space this out. You have like 30 days to get your repository ready, so don't feel like you have to like cram it all into just a few days there.
Cool. Okay, do we have any more questions for the folks here or from the folks here? All right, I'm going to take that as Jessica, you were pretty thorough. I feel like every time I was like, oh, I wonder if she'll talk about, oh yeah, she covered
that. I got you covered there.
Yeah, it's maintaining is, like you said, it can be very rewarding, sometimes overwhelming, but using these sort of like tools and spending that little bit of extra time at the beginning of this all on setup can make things a lot easier. So with that, actually, we just about come to the hour. So I think what I am going to do here is say a big thank you. A thank you to our speaker, Jessica, for doing this presentation. I think it was absolutely lovely, super informative, and like something that I will probably revisit in the next few weeks as I get ready for Hacktoberfest. Thank you to all the people who attended and your questions and just sort of like being supportive and being part of this community. And thank you to anybody who watched this later who thought like, hey, this might be interesting and a thing that I want to get into. So this is being recorded on the 1st of September, the 1st of the month. We're spending the entire month in VC thinking about getting ready for Hacktoberfest. So there's going to be more discussions about this in the Slack, in our various VC chats, in our different like subgroups. So look out for all of that. All the people you see here and the entire community at large are here as resources to support each other. So this conversation will continue if you're thinking about getting into open source. It doesn't have to be from a maintainer side. It could also be from a contributor side. I actually think understanding more about how maintainers work makes it easier to contribute because I sort of know how they're thinking and what they're looking for from me and like how I can support them. Just side note, really fun, like first PR or first contribution is actually sometimes to help them set up some of these things, which can be time consuming. And I've never met a maintainer who didn't appreciate someone who was like, hey, I made a template, or I can make an issue, or I can get these things kind of set up for you. But yeah, we will continue the discussion. Once again, thank you to everybody who came here, and have a wonderful rest of the day and have a wonderful Preptember. Oh, one last thing before I go. Becca dropped the link at the beginning. I'm gonna repaste that in the chat to the official Hacktoberfest.com site. And okay, yes, now I'm done. And again, thank you for coming. And again, have a wonderful day. And I'm gonna hit the stop recording button.